Two names, one room, zero warning. When Karoline Leavitt stepped up to the podium, no one expected what would come next. But in a moment that sent a chill through the air, she turned to Jasmine Crockett and exposed something that had been hidden for decades. What followed wasn't just silence, it was shock, disbelief, and the unraveling of a public image that had seemed untouchable. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a second of what happened next. The room was packed, its walls straining under the pressure of anticipation. Cameras hovered like vultures, red lights blinking, capturing every twitch and glance. At the center of it all stood Karoline Leavitt, her hand steady on the microphone, her eyes locked, not on the crowd, but directly on Jasmine Crockett. From the moment she stepped forward, the tension shifted. Something was about to happen. But what? And why was Crockett suddenly avoiding eye contact? Jasmine Crockett, a name that had grown synonymous with confidence and control, sat motionless. Her usual defiance was replaced by stillness, her face unreadable. Was it the pressure of the moment, or something else entirely? Karoline's tone, calm but laced with something sharper, began to cut through the noise. It was not a political jab, not a policy critique. This was personal. What kind of secret forces a seasoned politician to freeze? Why had this never come out before? And most of all, what gave Karoline Leavitt the nerve to bring it to light now? As Karoline paced, the crowd watched in a trance. She spoke not of scandals or legislation, but of character, of history, and of the past that someone had buried deep enough to almost forget. Almost. She referenced a name, a place, and a date. Details so specific that even the most skeptical listener leaned in closer. There was no accusation, just facts, recited, like chapters from a book no one else had ever read. Jasmine's hands clenched in her lap, her jaw tensed. The cameras zoomed in. Every blink became a headline in the making. Karoline's voice remained unshaken as she continued, "There are truths we hide because they're too painful. Others we bury because they would destroy us. But you, Congresswoman, buried yours so deep, you started believing it was never real." The room went still. What could be so devastating, so irreversible, that someone with Crockett's ironclad reputation would never want it spoken aloud? Was this a setup? A last-ditch effort to discredit her? Or was Karoline simply doing what no one else had dared, pulling the curtain back on a carefully constructed image? Karoline paused. Her next words didn't come with a flourish nor a dramatic gesture. They landed softly but carried weight. "I have no intention of humiliating you, Jasmine, but I will no longer stay silent while you paint yourself as someone you never truly were." The silence that followed was different. Not polite, not respectful. It was heavy. Even the air seemed to tighten. Crockett finally looked up, her eyes locking with Karoline's. There was no fire in them now, just fear and something close to recognition. Then came the name. One that had never been spoken in connection with Jasmine Crockett before. A name that triggered a visible reaction. Her shoulders flinched, her eyes widened ever so slightly. The secret had a face now. Someone in the crowd gasped. A few reporters scribbled notes with renewed urgency. Phones were lifted. The cameras rolled on. Karoline did not smile. She was not here for revenge. She was here for clarity, for truth. So what was the secret? Who was the person behind the name? And why did it shake Jasmine Crockett so deeply? The answers were hanging in the air, but no one dared speak. Not yet. The silence didn't break. It deepened. The air turned colder, tighter, as if the walls themselves were drawing in to listen. Jasmine Crockett, usually so quick to strike back, said nothing. Her lips parted as if to speak, but then pressed, shut again. Across from her, Karoline Leavitt stood still, no longer pacing, letting the silence do what words could not. That name, spoken once, hung like smoke over the crowd. For those unfamiliar, it was just a name, a moment. But to those who knew, those who had read between the lines for years, it was a confession without needing one. Karoline had not made a wild accusation. She had cracked open a sealed door, and everyone in the room could see the dust pouring out. Jasmine finally cleared her throat, her voice shaky but audible. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. But Karoline didn't respond. She simply stepped aside, pulling out a single sheet of paper and laying it on the lectern. A court transcript, public record, dated, signed, and stamped. There it was, in black and white. A case file from a southern courthouse, nearly 20 years old, one that named Jasmine Crockett under a different identity, a different life. It wasn't a crime, not in the legal sense, but it was damning in the court of public opinion. A betrayal of trust, of background, of origin. The persona she had built, grounded, authentic, self-made, was now riddled with cracks. She had changed her name, reinvented herself, buried the upbringing she never wanted to talk about. She had spoken for the voiceless while keeping her own voice on mute when it came to her past. Karoline's voice returned, but it was softer now, no longer a confrontation, more like a mirror. "I don't stand here to mock who you were, Jasmine. I stand here to ask, why lie about it for so long? Why pretend you came from struggle, when in truth you turned your back on it?" Crockett looked around the room. The audience, once filled with supporters and sympathizers, had become statues. Even her colleagues leaned away slightly, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire. She was alone now, and she knew it. But instead of shrinking, Jasmine stood. Her eyes flicked toward the paper, then back to Karoline. "You think exposing me will break me?" she asked, her tone sharp now, her voice back. "You think digging into my past makes you better than me?" Karoline didn't flinch. "No, but hiding it made you worse than you pretended to be." It was then that something shifted, not in the room, but in Jasmine herself. Her shoulders dropped. Her arms, once tense, opened slightly at her sides. She was done pretending. "Fine," she said. "Yes, I changed my name. I walked away from the life I was born into, because it was poison, because I had to." Gasps erupted from a few corners of the room. The cameras zoomed in. This was it, the moment everything cracked wide open. No denial, no lawyer-crafted statement, just raw confession. But it wasn't an apology. It was a declaration. "I was raised in a house full of abuse and silence," she continued. "I changed my name to escape it. I didn't think anyone would ever understand. And maybe I was right." The audience was still again, but not frozen this time. Listening. Karoline stepped back, slightly stunned. She had come with the truth, but Jasmine had just taken ownership of it in a way no one expected. The confrontation had sparked something else, something deeper than embarrassment. It had forced Jasmine Crockett to do what she had never done before: speak from the beginning. But would the public believe her now? Would they see courage in the confession, or deception in the years of silence? Karoline looked on, her mission complete, or so she thought. Yet as Jasmine continued, something entirely different began to take shape in the room. The energy was no longer about shame. It was about reckoning. The next part wouldn't be an attack. It would be a story, a reckoning, and a question of whether the truth could still set someone free, even this late. The atmosphere had transformed. No longer was it a courtroom of conflict. It had become a stage of reckoning. Jasmine Crockett, now center stage by default, turned toward the crowd. Her voice did not tremble. Her words no longer chased approval. They simply arrived, honest and unsparing. "I was 12 when I first ran away," she said, eyes fixed on the far wall, as though watching something none of them could see. The bruises faded, but the silence stayed, So when I turned 18, I changed everything. My name, my address, my future. I built a life no one could control. The crowd, now captivated, leaned in, not out of sympathy, but out of a gnawing need to understand. Everything Jasmine had ever stood for was now being reinterpreted under this new light. Had she truly deceived the public, or had she simply survived in silence? Karoline Leavitt stood frozen. She had expected denial, maybe outrage, but this raw, unfiltered truth had the weight of something far more powerful than any counterargument. And yet she couldn't shake the thought. Was this confession a performance, or was it the first moment of honesty from a woman who had built her career on calculated narratives? Still, Jasmine pressed on. I never lied about caring for people. I lied about where I came from because I thought no one would listen otherwise. I thought if they knew the truth, they'd see me as damaged. I was wrong. There was no applause, no interjection, only breathless quiet. And then Karoline finally spoke again, but not as a prosecutor. Her voice had changed, like a blade sheathed. "Why now?" she asked simply. "Why only tell the truth when you're cornered?" Jasmine turned, her face blank, unreadable. "Because you made me. And maybe that's what it took." It was not an admission of defeat. It was something far more complex. There was a sincerity in her words, but also a trace of bitterness. She had been forced into this vulnerability. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a confession carved out under pressure. And yet, the audience, watching both in the room and across millions of screens, began to fracture. Some saw strength, others saw strategy. The hashtags began to swirl online. Debates ignited. Talk show hosts, political commentators, and influencers grabbed their microphones. Was Jasmine Crockett redeemed, or just exposed? Behind the curtain, her staff looked pale, overwhelmed. Half of them were whispering into phones. The other half were refreshing social media feeds, watching public opinion whip back and forth like a pendulum caught in a storm. Meanwhile, Karoline was quiet. She had won the moment, but now she stood in its shadow. Her attack had drawn out something much deeper than expected, and now the spotlight had shifted, if only slightly, from judgment to compassion. But one man in the room wasn't convinced. Reporter from a major outlet stood up from the press box, voice clear, tone edged. "Miss Crockett," he said, "you claim this was about survival. But records show that your new identity also came with financial advantages, eligibility perks, and exclusive access to scholarships. Was this really about survival, or about reinvention for gain?" Gasps scattered across the room again. The question sliced through the empathy like a wire. Jasmine's eyes didn't flinch. "Both," she said without hesitation. "Sometimes survival means becoming someone the world will listen to." The boldness in her voice returned, but so did the controversy. The crowd was no longer just reacting. They were divided. Karoline, observing this new wave of tension, realized something else. This wasn't over. Jasmine's confession had opened a door, but the questions were only beginning. What about the bills she passed using that identity? What about the voters who believed in a version of her that no longer existed? Karoline had struck the match. But now she had to decide whether to let the fire burn or to take control of it, because one thing was certain. Jasmine Crockett had survived. But survival and truth are not always the same. And in politics, the difference could mean everything. The fire had been lit, and now the room smoldered with doubt. Whispers returned, louder this time, no longer muffled by shock. Jasmine Crockett had just laid bare a truth she had buried for decades, but it was not absolution. It was ammunition. The audience wasn't applauding, they were calculating, and Karoline Leavitt knew it. From the edge of the chamber, Karoline stepped forward again, not to attack, but to reclaim the moment. She had exposed the secret. She had watched Jasmine pivot it into a plea. But now came the reckoning. You speak of survival, Karoline said slowly. But what about the trust of the people who voted for you? The people who believed in your story because it resembled their own? Jasmine didn't respond immediately. Her eyes locked with Karoline's, not with animosity, but with the knowledge that this was the real trial. The courtroom was not made of wood and law books. It was the gaze of the people, both present and distant, watching from living rooms and phones. Karoline turned toward the crowd. What happens to truth when it is hidden for convenience? What happens when identity becomes a costume worn not to reflect reality but to manipulate it? She let the questions hang. Rhetorical, yes, but powerful. Jasmine finally stepped forward. You think I manipulated people? I gave them a leader who understood pain, poverty, and powerlessness because I lived it. It wasn't a performance. It was protection. Do you want to crucify every survivor who changed their name to escape their past? The words hit hard. Even Karoline's expression faltered, but she pressed on. No one faults you for escaping your past, she said. But you didn't just escape. You built a career on a version of it that wasn't true. And when challenged, you didn't come forward. You waited. You waited until the threat was real. That's not bravery. That's political instinct. The audience began to murmur again. Some nodded in agreement. Others shook their heads, conflicted. Jasmine, sensing the shift, looked away for the first time. Her silence now was different. Less calculated, more vulnerable. Karoline stepped down from the platform and approached the front row, pointing to no one and everyone. If truth only matters when we're cornered, then what kind of leaders are we choosing? What kind of country are we becoming? The room seemed to breathe again, heavy and uneven. The debate had moved beyond Jasmine. It had become a referendum on trust itself. At that moment, a man in the audience stood. He was older, weathered, a veteran from the look of him. My daughter voted for you, he said to Jasmine. She looked up to you because she thought you understood what it meant to have nothing. Are you telling me that was a lie? Jasmine looked at him directly. No, she said softer now. I'm telling you I've had nothing, but I've also had to hide it to be heard. Maybe that was wrong, but the pain was real. It was no longer a battle of facts. It was a war of perception. Jasmine had made her case. Karoline had driven the blade of accountability. Now the court of public opinion would decide who emerged stronger. Outside, the media had gone into overdrive. The headline crawls read like a battlefield. Crockett admits to altering past. Leavitt forces public confession. Survivor or strategist? Inside, the final act was taking shape. Karoline turned to Jasmine one last time. If you truly believe in redemption, she said, then own it fully. Not just the pain, but the years of silence. The voters don't need another excuse. They need the truth. All of it. Jasmine stepped forward slowly, her voice even, eyes unblinking. Then let them have it. The room fell into a deeper silence than before. No cameras panned, no anchors spoke. For a moment, the noise of modern politics faded, and what remained was something far older, something almost sacred. A confession had been made. A challenge had been issued. And now the truth was not just exposed. It was demanded. The atmosphere had shifted into something electric. Every face in the room, whether angered or inspired, was frozen in anticipation. Jasmine Crockett stood still, her body no longer tense with denial, but calm with a strange acceptance. Across, from her, Karoline Leavitt didn't move either. There was no triumph in her eyes yet, not until the final words were spoken. Jasmine reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her hand trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of what she was about to do. She unfolded it slowly and looked out at the rows of people watching her. This, she began, is the truth I never wanted to share. Not because I was ashamed of it, but because I believed it would destroy everything I had built. She held the paper up. It was a juvenile record, sealed, buried under years of legal red tape. A record from before she was ever Jasmine Crockett, when her name, her face, even her accent had been different. She read from it, briefly, clearly. Theft, truancy, a runaway at 14, time spent in a juvenile facility. Her parents had disowned her. She had slept on benches, in shelters, in cars. Gasps scattered through the room. Even Karoline blinked, caught off guard by the rawness of the admission. "I wasn't born into politics," Jasmine said. "I was born into chaos. I became Jasmine Crockett because I didn't want to die as the girl whose name I erased. And I never told the truth because I thought the truth would erase me again." Silence. And then Karoline stepped forward, her voice measured. "You think you're the only one who had to fight for air? You think you're the only one who had to invent a future out of nothing?" It wasn't condescending. It was connecting. "There are millions of people," Karoline continued, "who have dark chapters they wish they could burn. But they don't all get elected. They don't all hold power. And that's the difference. When you ask for power, you owe the truth." Jasmine looked down, then up again. This time locking eyes not just with Karoline, but with the audience, with the cameras, with the country. Then here it is, all of it. And in that moment, something changed. Not in Jasmine, not in Karoline, but in the crowd. They saw her. Not the polished politician, not the figure on TV, but the person. A broken girl who had stitched herself together with lies, half-truths, and desperation. She had misled, yes, but she had also survived. A young woman in the back stood up and clapped, then another, and another. Soon half the room was applauding. Not everyone, not unanimously, but genuinely. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about a human being daring to stand naked before the world and say, "Judge me." Karoline didn't interrupt. She didn't scold. Instead, she turned toward the crowd and nodded. Not a concession, but a recognition. Later that evening, the video would go viral. Not the confrontation, not the scandal, but the moment Jasmine held up her past and laid it bare. The headlines evolved within hours. Crockett admits past, gains unexpected support. Leavitt's challenge sparks, national debate on redemption. Truth or strategy? America reacts to emotional courtroom moment. In the days that followed, the story would ripple across the country. Talk shows, podcasts, dinner tables. It wasn't about left or right anymore. It was about how much of our past we're allowed to hide, and whether redemption requires complete transparency. As for Karoline, she walked away not with a victory speech, but with quiet reflection. She had exposed something enormous, but in doing so, she had also watched someone transform in front of her. And maybe that was the real victory. And Jasmine? For the first time in her career, she stood without a mask. No crafted origin story, no hidden documents, just her. Raw, real, and unshielded. And in that brutal vulnerability, she found something she had never felt before in the public eye. Freedom.